Start.
Sorry, did you say start? Okay. I would now like to call the September 18th, 2024 Longmont Sustainability Advisory Board meeting to order. Can we please start with a roll call?
Yes, Michelle Roth.
Here.
Mary Lynn.
Present.
Corkut Anaran.
Here.
Robert Davidson.
Here.
Ralph Grosswald.
Here.
Daniel Green, Leonard.
Daniel Leonard is here.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Ethan Augreen.
Here.
Lisa Knobloch.
Here.
Francie Jaffe.
Here.
And Susan Bartlett will be joining us a little bit later. Heather McIntyre is here. And then we have our presenter with us, too, Michael from Sun Studio. And Chair, you have a quorum.
Great. We acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. We honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the First Peoples have with this land. It's our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. And just to remind everyone, we have our inclusion statement. The Sustainability Advisory Board embraces diverse perspectives from its members and the public to create an inclusive space where everyone feels welcome to share their opinion. The board asks that all attendees listen and speak with respect and avoid attacks on individuals or specific group identities. First on our agenda, we have the approval of minutes from our last August 21st meeting. I don't know if anyone has any amendments to them or would like to move to.
I move to accept the minutes.
Thank you, Ralph.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Abstain.
Okay. I have Cricket abstain. Great.
So,
Okay.
Ethan, was that an approval or? Sorry, I didn't see your hand. If you raised it for.
Oh, sorry, I was
approval.
muted. No, I did not approve.
Okay.
Okay. Does that still pass if we, so we have a no and a,
Yeah, we have a the motion carries with 5 approvals, 1 opposing and 1 abstaining.
okay. Do we have any from the staff? Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No.
Okay. Okay, so then we have our general business. We have the passive design solutions. Michael.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick intro and then pass it off to you, Michael. For some context for folks that we've been talking about or starting to talk about, we've talked to you all a little bit and haven't brought specific codes in front of you as yet, but through things like the sustainability plan, the climate action recommendations report, the beneficial building electrification plan, there's components of all of those that talk about different codes and policies that support building decarbonization and other climate related action. And as we are starting to look at building codes through the Boulder County, or now it's the Northwest Regional Code cohort, it's been expanded beyond Boulder County. Mary introduced me to Michael several months back, looking at the components of passive design solutions and the importance of that as we're also looking at other building decarbonization measures. And we brought the idea to you all a couple months ago to bring Michael to speak to you all, to educate you all on passive design. And so he is here today, and I'll pass it off to him to do a little bit more introduction of himself and then go through a presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm an architect and planner in the same business as Corkit, and we've worked together on and off going back decades. And the topic of I've been designing a lot of passive solar urban buildings and neighborhoods in the last 20 years or so. And within the topic, passive design really means kind of a low-tech ways to reduce resource consumption and environmental impacts. And it could apply to any resource, to healthy soil, to stormwater and water conservation. I'm going to just focus on using the sun for heating and blocking the sun from unwanted summer heating, and how that plays out can play out in urban neighborhoods in our region, in our particular climate. And just a couple examples from our work at Sun Studio. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm just going to show two projects maybe that we've been working on in the Front Range area. And we've attempted to, do some innovations on passive solar layout of buildings. And these are just some case studies. I'm going to start with the Geos neighborhood in Arvada, Colorado. We did most of the planning on this project about 18 years ago. Because of the housing market collapse, and because we were doing just a couple of things a little bit differently, trying to do very energy efficient net zero energy homes, the project proceeded very slowly. But it's now about 3/4 built out. And this is an aerial of a 3D SketchUp model from way back. Right now, I would say that most of this part of the neighborhood is built out, and we're currently in detailed. We're in for construction documents on the buildings that are over in this area of the neighborhood. As a general kind of rule of thumb of working with the sun in our climate is that and you can ignore the slide for just a second. In the summer, we are basically in a hot, arid climate, not unlike Cairo or Phoenix or Albuquerque. And a lot of the strategies for staying cool in the summer are similar in hot, arid places around the world. But we're also in a kind of high elevation, high plains, steppe land, similar to Uzbekistan or Bolivia or Afghanistan. Or New Mexico. And in high steppe land, we have a big swing in temperature from night to day, and we have a lot of sun. And so in our winters, we have a lot of opportunity to bring in the sun to heat our buildings. There's been a research done where on suburban homes, looking at their energy conservation, where if you have a rectangle and you stretch that rectangle out east to west, rectangular house, it's going to need less energy to heat and cool it than if you oriented that rectangle north to south. And the main reason for that has to do with in the summer, in our summer times, we have 5 hours of sun on the east sides of our buildings and 5 hours of sun in the afternoon on the west sides of our buildings. And when you stretch your building out north to south, you have a lot more surface area absorbing that solar heat gain at a time of the year when you don't want it. If you turn that building the other direction, east to west, you can drop your energy consumption by roughly a third because you have less surface area facing that unwanted summer heat. but you also have more surface area facing the wanted winter heat. And this is something that I've enjoyed, working with since I had a commission to design and build a passive solar house when I was in my 20s, 40 years ago, here in the Front Range, and learned a lot from that, and then tried to scale that up to neighborhoods. So one of the things we've done in a couple of our projects is try to space the houses apart so that the winter sun can come over the roof of one house and heat the next house. And I'll make a kind of a qualifying statement that there are a lot of times when you can try to help solve one little detailed problem of urban design by giving things more space. But in general, you're not going to make a city more sustainable by making it lower density. So we could like require less density and let the existing houses have better solar access for winter sun, but the sustainability benefits of density far outstrip the sustainability benefits of being able to heat your house by the sun. The lowest environmental impacts and resource conservation per capita are in the densest cities in the world, because we have less surface area of our house in which to lose the heat, and we can use public transit and walk. So the presentation I'm giving is not advocating for low density neighborhoods. It's just explaining how the sun works with buildings in medium density neighborhoods. This is about 20 years ago. We did a lot of different layouts of ways of laying out streets, blocks, buildings, and alleys, and tried to find a way to achieve the highest density of 2- and 3-story, well laid out passive solar houses. And in that generally, as a rule of thumb, we're stretching out buildings east to west and finding a way to space the buildings so that one house is not blocking the winter sun from the next house. That played out in the Geos neighborhood in Arvada, and you can see that most of the building groups in this plan are rectangles stretched out left to right in a compact layout. So the overall density here is generally townhouse level density, but there's a lot of single family on small lots. And this is zooming into one of the blocks. We did this thing at Geos where every other house was an alley house. And that allowed sun to come over our front yard to heat this house, and sun to come over this backyard to heat that house. I don't recommend it as the best layout of passive solar neighborhoods, but it's the idea we had 20 years ago for this neighborhood. And this is kind of a 3D model showing that layout when we were designing it. And then here's an aerial view from actually about quite a number, 8 years ago or so, showing the initial build out of part of the neighborhood, where this is a south-facing surface that's getting winter sun. It has eyebrows here, which block the steep summer sun, but let in the low winter sun. We do not have a lot of windows facing west, and that reduces summer heat gain in the afternoon summers. And this is a view from the sidewalk of some of these houses. Again, this is the south facade, and these windows are getting winter sun. It's not a ton of glazing, it's just orienting them in the right way. And then here's a house on the alley that also is getting winter sun. And this is kind of in a springtime view, morning view. This shows a more detailed site plan of a house in the front of the lot with a backyard. Over this backyard, the winter sun comes to help heat this alley house. And likewise, this house here gets winter sun over this person's yard. So we wrote a whole code for this neighborhood. It's based a lot on skinny lots in Denver, and basically allowing an alley house every other lot. And these are just some more views of phase 1 of the Geos neighborhood as it's been built out. These are net zero energy homes. They generally, drop their energy demands by about 1/3 due to the good solar orientation. And then they have a very high performance airtight building envelope, which drops the energy demands by another 1/3. And so no natural gas is needed. And the solar panels offset the electricity needed to heat and cool them using ground source and air-to-air heat pumps. And these are small townhouses, similarly stretched out east to west with eyebrows that that block the summer sun from heating these windows, but let in the winter sun. And this is the west facade here. These are some townhouses, 3-story live-work townhouses that also have eyebrows. In this case, solar panel eyebrows that help block that steep summer sun in midday. And some, south-facing front stoops, so people can, get out into the sunshine in the winter and have some outdoor living. This is the duplex with some other features. And this is the west side of that duplex. This is another neighborhood that we planned back in 2016 or so for Lafayette, Colorado. It was an 80-acre passive solar neighborhood. In this one, we created a gap between every house with a south-facing yard so that the houses could capture their sun over their neighbors in a slightly simpler layout than what we had at Geos. Again, this was alley-loaded development. And this is an example of one of the homes we designed, a senior cottage that has a south-facing outdoor space. Winter sun comes in and heats these windows on the south side. On the east and west, a porch helps shade the living room window. So this neighborhood did not work out. It's not being built out with the passive solar. The project got into financial challenges, got sold to a national home builder, and the national home builder did not want to do the passive solar and was able to talk new city staff into taking that out of the plan. While in our Geos neighborhood, it's being built by national home builders today, but we're working for them, but it's following our zoning code. So, I mean, that's the end of my little presentation, on passive solar neighborhoods. I have other resources to look at if you want to do any question and answer about any of this. So, Lisa, does somebody
I
want to
can also
moderate?
help with I'll just go in order that I see it, but Daniel?
Thanks so much, Michael. I was kind of curious a little bit if you could speak a little bit to building materials, and specifically, I was kind of thinking, I've heard some research into using more stone and earth materials to increase, I think it's called the thermal mass of buildings.
Mhm.
I'm just kind of wondering how that plays, especially if we're contemplating new codes for the city or adjusting our codes, what kind of building material considerations we should keep in mind.
Yeah, I think what I've learned in my career is that thermal mass works well. It can work very well, but it works well back in the day when houses were leaky and they weren't very energy efficient or airtight. My first project I ever did was here in the Front Range. It was a passive solar house with adobe and slab on grade and radiant slab. And we tried everything that we thought was best practices, including a lot of thermal mass. But we found that in our climate, there's lots of times when it goes from sunny to being shady. And in the shoulder seasons, like October, you can get a lot of sun pouring into houses. But if you have a lot of thermal mass, your house is going to be too hot. And then you got to open up all the windows and try to dissipate all that heat. So and with airtight construction, the thermal mass is less important. And so it there buildings are complex systems, just like civilization's a complex system. And you can take any individual idea, like say thermal mass, and to understand its benefits, you got to put it in the context of complex set of variables. So in the short answer, it's not a quick fix having thermal mass. It can be wonderful if you live in a house and use it in the right way and have a whole house fan and you open and shut the blinds, but it's not how most Americans live today. Americans don't spend a lot of time operating their house the way people did 100 years ago or 75 years ago. The culture's changed, but also the technology's changed with airtight construction. So it can be a great thing, but I wouldn't require it as a code item, Yeah.
Robert?
Sure. I had a quick question just about the codes and restrictions that sort of may prevent this kind of design from taking place. Like when you engage on a project like this, what stops a designer or a planner from doing it? Are there typically codes that impede that development strategy that need to be revisited, or what's that experience like?
Well, 20 years ago, I was always writing my own code for as part of a planned unit development for our neighborhoods and getting buy-in from everybody on the project. And about 15 years ago, City of Denver went through a zoning code update, and I thought it would be fabulous if they were to allow alley houses on skinny lots so that they could bring in winter sun, into those houses. It wasn't really a hot topic at the time because fracking was beginning to make natural gas extremely cheap, and no one was really thinking about heating their houses with sun. And there was a lot of details in the Denver code, and then to suddenly allow alley houses was going to violate a lot of things that had been put into the code in the previous 20 years. So that idea didn't go anywhere in that case. I'm finding in the kind of housing shortage that we have in the last 5 and 10 years, the way to build affordably is having national home builders pick a house type that they have done all over the Front Range, if not all over the United States, and rubber stamp it quickly onto very familiar lot sizes. And so the obstacle I've run into in the last 5 or 10 years is that the national home builders are looking for rectangles of a certain dimension to put their house down and not have to have this new variable of the passive solar. So that I'm finding that it's not flowing into the mass production industry of home building, to have a unique requirement of the passive solar today. There's more of a stress on just getting houses built because housing's so expensive. So I'm not seeing interest in these ideas currently, especially not in new subdivisions. That's kind of saddening to me.
Mary?
Hi, thanks for showing us your designs again, Michael. I find them really inspiring. And I do have a number of questions. First one is, we live in a house that is a passive house, and it was built using apps technology with a very narrow balcony over the window wall on the south side that shades the house in the summer, but is just high enough so that the winter sun gets in, and then we have some thermal mass inside the room. we have that and a little wood stove that we use some of the time, and our gas bill is $44 a month around the year. And this is an old house.
Mhm.
I drive around Longmont and I see thousands of houses that it appears to me are on a grid and have enough of a southern exposure so that they could have some kind of modifications added to them, solar greenhouses or trom walls or a window wall with apps. And we could save so much of our energy, and we wouldn't have to be dealing with the infrastructure cost of ripping out gas and putting in electric, electric appliances, the heat pumps and so forth. And I don't think that this is something that actually the city has as a goal, or even is on the city's radar. And I don't know that the codes actually make any of this easy. So, and you don't live in Longmont. I know that you did work with Longmont a bit to create the passive block in Prospect, but I just wonder if you have any thoughts about this, Michael, about the dilemma I just outlined.
Well, I don't understand the technologies that you're talking about, but generally, you don't want to force people into a particular building technology or technique. Sometimes municipalities can allow things like, say, solar panels or a swamp cooler to encroach into a bulk plane or a setback, as an automatic approval, just to not make it hard to have those things in your home. But no, I really don't have a reaction to yours. I think that what you did in your house is very idiosyncratic, and you look around and see that you could do that on a lot of other houses. But I don't have any input on whether that would take off if the city were to make it easier to do those things.
It's more common in Arizona, where I'm from. It's Paolo Soleri of Arcosanti. He came up with the idea of having the eyebrows at just a certain level so that you get passive gain in the winter. But
oh yeah, that's
yeah.
what all of our architecture does in a very refined
Yeah.
way. And
Yeah.
and so I mean, I
And
think
I'm not talking about legislating it. I'm just saying that making it something that people know more about and are more likely to, look at as an option. I guess the city would have to undertake sort of a PR focus on that, as well as changing code to make it
I mean,
easier.
it's not just a city thing. It would be like a global thing, but the problem is that with fracking, natural gas is so cheap, energy is so cheap, that there's no cultural grassroots movement reason for people to want to be really interested in this, so and we don't live in a dictatorship where they're going to suddenly start taxing energy like that and make culture respond to that, and then people suddenly are interested in the eyebrows. So it's a tricky thing. I think we built the case studies. I really think that culture evolves into adapting all of these things when there's an economic basis for it. But right now, energy is so cheap. And so it's just not happening culturally, and then it's not trickling into popular culture or into codes, sadly. I mean, I thought that we were going to hit peak oil 15 years ago, and everyone was going to be interested in all these ideas that we were using in the Geos neighborhood, and then fracking made fossil fuels cheap, and the housing market collapses. And whenever some catastrophe happens, like an economic downturn or a COVID, people shift their focus.
Another just quick question for you, Michael. I've been watching a lot of videos and series about new construction and innovations in construction. And it seems to me, when I first learned about solar energy, when I studied it at a little college in Vermont that had solar buildings with wood stove backups, they were called passive solar buildings, but now they're just called passive because the envelope is so tight. You don't even have to really think about the solar applications, which makes it considerably less expensive to do. And it seems like even that idea is something that a city or a region could take on and be marketing and focusing on, and getting people, to plant more trees and to, to sort of like beef up their envelope. And that right there could help to start change the culture. Again, you've probably said what you have to say about this, but I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that as well.
Well, I think the National Building Code's improved a lot and is requiring more airtight, well-insulated buildings. That's been, and then municipalities can tack on top of that even higher requirements, but then it makes housing more expensive. And then people can't afford then to live in Longmont, and they have to move to Weld County. I mean, it's not a simple fix.
Thank you, Michael. Ralph, I had seen your hand earlier.
Thank you. Michael, thank you very much for taking the time to address our board. I had a kind of a practical question. I could talk to you about solar all day because I started designing my first solar house in about 1992. But I want to ask from the standpoint of our board, could you talk about your experience working with staff and governing individuals in the development of codes, and what advice you might have to our committee to aid in the process? So we could support efforts to move more in a direction of taking advantage of these technologies.
Well, let me think about that. Municipal officials that are dealing with zoning language, I mean, they're responsible for a lot of different public interests and a lot of different moving parts. And often in zoning codes, there's a lot of little details that were put in there, say 30 years ago or 20 years ago, and someone might have an institutional memory of why it was done. And so to make changes, I mean, it's good to have your big picture goals well established, and say we want to try to achieve these big picture goals, and then have subtopics of these are subtopics of areas where we think there could be improvements, but allow room for staff to also make it their own, and maybe come up with some of their own ideas of what they think are achievable, practical, rather than trying to go all the way in all the detail and say we want to add this one thing to the code. I would think you'd want to cultivate interest in and ownership of it from staff also.
Crockett.
Just wanted to explain the thermal mass a little bit further. If you have a window and you're heating the ground, that's good. But real thermal mass is about the walls. If the wall is a brick wall and it heats up and then gives the heat in time into the interior, it works perfectly. I live in a historic house. It's a load-bearing brick, and that's what happens. But current building codes don't allow that, because you need to provide certain amount of insulation. Either inside or outside, you apply insulation and you kind of block that heat transfer. And also the heating system is very important too. Since this is a historic house, it's a boiler system. So the radiator, as the name suggests, radiates and heats the walls as well as the inside temperature. And as long as you can keep a wall warm, that works like an insulation. But that's really hard to model and calculate. So none of your regular engineers would go there and calculate that and justify that to the building officials. So as it is now, in other words, airtight doesn't work with thermal mass perfectly. They kind of cancel each other. So Michael is right about that. Lifestyles, but also the conflict with the building code is that building code goes for the airtight insulation packages. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, Corkit, that also makes me think of another issue, is that current building codes nationally and in Colorado, they emphasize the air tightness of a building envelope and the insulation of the building envelope, but they get zero credit for solar orientation.
Yeah.
None. And so then it takes away, and so like people go in to meet a certain energy score, and all the modeling and measuring that's required by municipalities gives zero credit for solar orientation. It's as if there was no sun. There was no solar orientation at all, as if we didn't live in a climate, with daytime and nighttime and winter and summer. And it drives me crazy that you can drop energy demands by like a third by working with the sun in your climate. And yet all of the codes are saying, oh, you have to ignore that, ignore it. So maybe you could ask your municipalities to try to give credit, extra credit to people who work with the sun, on top of the current codes, rather than forcing everybody to do a solar energy model, or use a different software that does take advantage, that takes into consideration, the movement of the sun.
Mary?
Hi, our house is lath and plaster, and we are amazed at how much thermal mass it has. We're amazed at how much we can feel the radiant heat from the walls. And I've also wondered the same thing. I recently have been looking at the architecture and the absolute brilliant ingenuity of Mohenjo-Daro, which is one of our oldest cities that's ever been found. It was on a grid system with every house oriented to the south, and with the interior courtyard system that is familiar all the way through the Roman period and is still used all over the Mediterranean and North Africa. And the Persian era, and it's believed that these houses had it too. They had the towers that that took advantage of the Bernoulli effect to draw air from the hot courtyard into the cool courtyard, and then out the tower for cooling, and then to be reversed during the day. And I just look at it and I say, how did we lose some of the most ancient technology for heating and cooling
Yeah.
so long ago? And we don't even have the most basics of this, of using nature for heating and cooling, even recognized as, an incentive, or a tax incentive, or even recognized in any way in our building codes. And
Yeah.
now, sorry for the lecture on ancient architecture and history.
No,
but I'll shut up now.
my answer, Mary, to that is cheap energy. I mean, our culture, we grew very quickly. We built the United States in 5 minutes relative to Persia, and we did it with, we had East Coast building types, and we rubber stamped them all across the United States.
Yeah.
Or we developed the ranch house in California, and we rubber stamped it all the way out the other way across the United States. With every solar orientation, and United States controlled a lot of the world's energy resources, so we could have cheap energy, and we became an illiterate culture. So,
and we even lost things in the South, all throughout, the shacks all the way across the South, including in some of Colorado. There were shotgun shacks, which had the cooler air passage area that again created the Bernoulli effect and created the air to move through. You know about this, the covered breezeways. So I encourage this committee to look into what we can do to bring these ideas back.
other questions?
Daniel?
Yeah, Michael, you had mentioned a couple times natural gas specifically, and so I was curious, like Denver has started passing ordinances restricting new natural gas installations, and I'm kind of curious if you're seeing that connected to changing the economic situation you were describing to incentivize more passive solar, or use of more passive solar in buildings. Is that something we should be examining?
I think that the movement to go electric is kind of detached from the passive solar orientation. It's just like people are, instead of using fossil fuels, let's use electric and use high efficiency. So like I have a 1890s brick house that has great solar orientation. I did a passive solar remodel of it 25 years ago. And then this summer I electrified it. And now, you know, investing almost as much money as it took to buy the house in the first place. I have electric mechanical system and a solar panel system and electric appliances. And my my utility bill for July, when the AC was running all the time, my utility bill was zero.
Yeah.
But I think the movement is, so electrification is trying to get off natural gas, but no one's tying it back to the passive solar. My house is passive solar, so maybe that helped a little bit.
Thanks.
Well, I bet you have other agenda items today.
Thank you so much for your time today, Michael.
Yeah.
You've given us a lot to think about as a board.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay, thanks so much. It was a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Okay. That was great.
I'd like to move that we continue this conversation in a future meeting to see if there's anything that we can do to help further the direction of nature-based approaches to buildings and energy.
Can I ask a question on that, Mary?
Sure.
Yeah, back to what Lisa was saying, am I hearing it right that there's an opportunity coming for us to review current building codes and offer guidance on those?
Well, we can do that at any point. I mean,
Well, it sounded like there was something structurally that was in my
yeah, I found the entity, and I'm sure Lisa could send it to you. I think we should be reviewing what this cross Boulder entity is doing in terms of reviewing the city codes, and see where a board like ourselves could have an impact in that.
Yeah, so to clarify, it's not necessarily reviewing current city boards. So part of, and this is going back, I know, a little bit before some of you were on the board, when we did the beneficial building electrification plan, which came out of the climate action recommendations report as a look specifically at how to reduce emissions from
Is it just me?
No,
No.
it's me too.
Lisa froze.
I froze for a second there.
Yeah, she's still frozen.
It's when they stop blinking that you know.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry, I don't know why I got kicked off for a second there.
Because there's ongoing reviews, at any point we can look at the codes and make comments, Daniel. And Lisa said there is a cohort that's doing that across the cities.
Gotcha.
And the cohort is called Roadmap to Net Zero Energy New Construction, and there's a PDF. And I'm going to send this to Heather right now so that we can all sort of look at this. I'm sort of, I mean, Lisa's the person who's involved with this, I believe, so she knows more than I do, but I'm going to send it to Heather right now.
Thank you.
Can you
And-
all hear me now?
Yes. Welcome back.
Okay, I'm going to do my best. If it's like kicking me off and bringing me back on. So if it does that again, Heather, I'll log off and log back on and see if that helps.
Perfect.
So as part of the beneficial building electrification plan, that was when we started talking about building electrification codes. We know that that's a big chunk of our emissions come from buildings through the use of both electricity and natural gas. And that was early on when that building code cohort was getting together and starting to talk about those codes. And so the recommendation from the beneficial building electrification plan which was brought to this board and also sent on to city council for approval, recommended that we follow the code cohort recommendations once they come out. And part of that was to be in line with the rest of the region, to make it give us a little bit more, I think, support as a region in moving forward, and also creating consistency, because a lot of our contractors and developers, you know, work across the region as well. And there's a hodgepodge of building codes in different municipalities. So that code cohort wrapped up its codes about sometime last year. And we did bring that for a short discussion to this group. And then we were waiting to roll those into the 2024 international building codes or international energy codes, the IACC. And that was a delayed process. And those code books actually just came out maybe not even a month ago. And so we've been waiting for those codes to come out to see how the code cohort recommendations align with those codes. And then that is once we kind of go through that process and we get some further direction from city council, because there's some other stuff happening in that space that's making that pretty complicated. When we have a set of recommendations that we want to take in front of council, we will bring those code recommendations to this group for discussion and to make your recommendation as a board to the city council about how you all think they should consider those codes. So that is the opportunity that is coming up. We don't have a firm timeline because of those complicating factors that keeps kind of pushing that back. But yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Thanks, Lisa. Since the city of Longmont has and various cities in Boulder County have made it very clear that there's many ways in which the folks who live here are not waiting but willing to set the standard for various things, I would like this committee to start working on our recommendations now and to not wait and have a reaction within a limited time period to work that other folks have done. I really feel our presenters' frustration with the fact that the home builders seem to set the standard. And I would really like to see the city setting the standard for some things. I mean, my whole neighborhood, almost my whole neighborhood could put a trom wall on and, you know, be for a couple $1,000s with some, you know, air exchangers, and who knows how much of the energy of each house would be saved because of the orientation of the houses. And, you know, we could be planting more trees across the city. I would like us to engage and demonstrate how the citizens and the experts in a city can engage with a process like this. And yeah, and I would like us to look at the PDF that I just sent and any other documents that demonstrate where the process is regionally, and see what else we have to add so that when things are finally adopted, maybe we really get a whole new vision.
We do have a motion on the table, but we need a second. Mary moved to continue the conversation at a future meeting to encourage the city to move toward more passive solar design.
I'll second that. Yeah.
All those in favor? All those,
Sorry, Michelle, would we not have the opportunity for discussion before we vote?
yeah, sorry, we can go back. We want to have a discussion about that first.
Yes, so I do have a question.
Go ahead, Ralph.
Thank you. While I completely support the intention behind this, and this is one of the reasons why I asked Michael the question that I did, which is how can we as a board be more effective in influencing these codes? I have a little concern about having the level of expertise, and I'm going to just speak personally. You know, I run 2 companies, having the time to get to the level that I feel I can make or participate in a recommendation that could have a very significant impact, both in you know, for people's lives and building homes, people's incomes, but still wanting to meet the intention of what I know Mary is hoping to do, which I support 100%. And so I think it's something that I wanted to just share, you know, having gone through some discussions in the last couple of weeks regarding the IRP from Platte River, and realizing how much there is to know to be able to make informed decisions. I'm just curious what people's thoughts are about this. I had been frustrated over my couple years on the board that there's been a lot of talk, and I don't feel that we have had a significant impact in changing the lives of ourselves and our neighbors. So on the one hand, I'm ready to get out there and rabble rouse. On the other hand, I'm trying to figure out what makes sense from a practical standpoint to be able to make a contribution that is well researched, well thought out, and that aligns with what our good intentions are. So I wanted to just, I'm sorry to be a little wordy here, but this is something that I think impacts what we do in every meeting, not just on this topic, but on other topics. So I wondered how people felt about it. I mean, I'm very open to having experts come and educate us. I don't have 4, 5, or 6 hours to invest in educating myself to the level that I would feel comfortable to be able to prepare initiatives to make a recommendation to City Council, but other people may feel differently about that. So I wanted to just lay this, you know, out for discussion in a very open way, and very, very interested to hear how other very conscientious board members feel about this. Thank you.
How are we doing on time for this agenda item, Michelle?
Well, we still have a couple. We have some public invite to be heard, and then we have a couple discussions that I feel like that might take a while, because we have the public invited to be heard discussion and the IRP possible letter that were on the agenda. So I don't know. I feel like those might take a little while as well. But
Well,
I
I
think
made a motion a while ago that we didn't
know,
act
yeah.
on, did we?
that we need to, I just want to say I 100% agree with Ralph as well, that I am really inspired by Mary's knowledge of the topic, and I feel like I have a basic fundamental understanding of passive design, and I agree that I think we should be trying to do something about not letting the developers lead housing, because of course it's just going to be the cheapest and easiest. But I agree with the educational side of it. I want to have a productive discussion and be able to contribute something that's meaningful. So yeah.
I missed what Ralph said. My computer was freezing yet again.
Pretty much just that, just the well, Ralph, if you want to summarize.
I'll try to do it more succinctly than the first time.
Okay, go on.
Main thing was, Mary, that I wanted to let you know that I supported 100% the intention of what you had, but that I was concerned about this board having the level of expertise that was necessary to make recommendations on this. While on the one hand, I was complaining about the fact that we had talked a lot and not done much in my few years on the board that really impacts people's lives, I would be open to a motion to bring expertise in rather than us trying to develop this, because from my standpoint, at least, and I was asking what other board members felt about this, I don't have the time to get to the level of expertise that I would want to have to be able to make recommendations that are going to impact people's lives, people's wallets, people's futures. But I'd be very open to having experts come in and talk to us about it.
I'm happy to do research. I was a professional journalist writing about these issues. We have folks on the board right now who have expertise with planning and environmental policy in various areas. I feel certain that we could look at what other cities have done who are leaders, and we could summarize some of those things and bring them to the city and understand what it is that we're presenting, Ralph. And I'm happy to do the research and lead an effort. Maybe there are other people. I know Corkett has a lot of experience in city planning. I don't, Ethan, I'm not sure about your background. Robert, I mean, I'm sure there's other people in here who could contribute to an effort like this. Daniel, I don't know what you've contributed, but we could undertake a research project and try to do something better than what we, better than what we have. Daniel, I know that you, like me, feel like we should be having more of a educational effort to sort of like inspire our fellow residents to, step it up. I'm just saying I would like to have this. I would like to go in and do some research and have just further discussion about this at a further meeting. That's all I'm saying.
I just want to jump in quickly, and I apologize, Corkett and Daniel, just give me a second. I want to make sure that I'm providing you all the best sort of guidance in terms of your role with city council. I think if you all wanted to pursue encouraging the city to look more deeply at opportunities for passive solar codes and policies or other mechanisms, be they incentives or something else that would encourage passive solar solutions, that course of action would be for, and if you all wanted to discuss that further, or if one of you wanted to go do some research as Mary's suggesting and bring it back for a summary, that would be to take that to city council as a recommendation from this board, and it would be city council's decision to say whether or not they would choose to prioritize that, at which time they would then direct staff to pursue that.
Right.
In which case, then it would be on staff's, within staff's purview to then, find those experts if we don't have that expertise in-house, develop that language in which we would need to work with our city attorney's office, all of the things that would need to go into that process. So that wouldn't be the role of this board. The role of this board would be to say, we believe this has merit, and we would like to ask the city council to prioritize this as you all are looking at other climate and sustainability related codes and policies. And then that decision would be to city council. So I just wanted to make that clear for folks in your discussion.
So we could just start with a general letter, Lisa, of a specific recommendation to city council saying we think you should be looking more at this. But in order to do that, we'd have to have a better understanding of where the code actually stands in that regard and what other folks are doing. And that's the research I was willing to do, looking at other cities. And then and then bringing back into the future a recommendation that we write a letter to city council.
Just quickly jump to say I would support that.
Well, we should hear from Daniel and Corkett.
Yeah, Daniel.
Parliamentary procedure, right? Yeah, that is Ralph and Michelle, I really do agree with what you were saying and thinking of the most efficient and effective use of our time, knowing we only meet once a month. And so, yeah, Lisa, to what you're saying, that's my that is my hope of what we could aim towards. And so that's why I asked about the opportunity, since it does sound like we have a little opportunity opening where, changes to the code are being made and we're engaging experts who can advise the best changes to the code. I don't think this panel can out-expert the experts. But what I do think we can do, and I think is important to our role, is to offer that community the community perspective and maybe some general guidance on the goals we would expect to be prioritized in those codes. And so that's kind of my vote for that discussion, to say, well, what are those, top 3 priorities or areas of expertise we'd suggest city council and city staff be exploring, on behalf of, the community interest in this.
Corkett?
Yeah, I'm new in the board, so I don't want to stir this way or other, but I'm willing to share my expertise. And that is, I teach regulation and code writing, and I published a book about coding according to the climate. So I'm volunteering to provide that if needs to be. Thanks.
Do you have any copies to loan?
What's that?
Can I borrow a copy?
Sure.
Great. I'll email you and we'll figure out how to get that.
Sure.
I think that if we have folks here who have expertise and we're willing to put together a thoughtful letter and demonstrate the expertise we have, that's just a plus for city council. So can we vote? Do we want to have a further
Can you
conversation
just,
about this?
can we just re-summarize your motion?
I want to have a further conversation in this group about, I want to have, schedule a further conversation for this committee, in which we summarize, our recommendations to city council regarding future codes that focus on, using nature-based approaches to, energy and sustainability.
Mary, is that an amended motion then?
Thanks, Heather. Yes, that is an amended motion.
Can you restate that, please? The other motion was already seconded, so
Oh,
really we should be
okay.
Oh,
voting
so
on
maybe we
that.
can just vote on it. Can
before-
you just read it
okay.
back
Okay.
to us, Heather, if you wrote it down?
Yeah,
Can-
Mary moved to continue the conversation at a future meeting to encourage the city to move toward passive solar design, and Daniel seconded that motion.
Well, I said passive design, not passive solar.
Okay, passive design.
Passive and nature-based approaches. I think that's what I said.
Okay.
Okay, so can we vote?
And all those in favor? And all those who oppose?
So I see 6-1, is that correct? Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, everybody. So next on our agenda, we have the public invited to be heard. Heather, do we still have two?
We do. First up, we have Gary Hodges.
So before we get started, I would just like to open it up for public invited to be heard. As a way of reminder for everyone, the Longmont Municipal Code, section 2.96.020 describes the powers and duties of the Sustainability Advisory Board as follows. So the power should be advisory only. The duties of the board shall be as followed: to identify topics related to environmental quality and sustainability, such as air and water quality, pollution prevention, solid waste disposal and recycling, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and green building, and to advise City Council on plans, policies, and actions related to those topics. And City Council may request the board to consider environmental topics not specifically listed in the section. B, to advise the City Council on environmental and sustainability aspects of city plans, policies, and directives related to goals and strategies. And C, to define goals and for the board to prepare work plans aligned with board responsibilities to advise council on environmental and sustainability topics. So each person wishing to speak will be unmuted by Heather, one at a time. When it is your turn to speak, please state your name and address for the record, and you will have 5 minutes for your discussion.
And Gary, you're good to go.
All right, thank you. And I'm coming across, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, so I'm on a work trip, and so I apologize that my comments are not as may not be as cleanly organized as I would like. I want to start off first off saying that I don't like the idea of having to email on prior to a meeting to get a Zoom link to participate. I think that should be something that can happen at the last minute for anybody that would like to participate in the board discussion. So I enjoyed the passive solar comments or just presentation and the following comments. And I applied for the board the last time. One of my ideas was a tree park in the city that would have examples of different trees that grow well in Colorado. So to dovetail off of Mary Lynn's nature-based approach, I think that might have some value. You know, the whole idea of like deciduous trees on the south side and conifers on the north, I think that's the convention. All right, so on to more of my comments I wanted to talk about. So the mission statement in part from Platte River Power Authority reads, Platte River will safely provide reliable, environmentally responsible, and here's the point I want to make, financially sustainable energy to the owner communities. So the sustainability is right there in their mission statement. It's coming at it from a different angle, though. It's about, on the affordability front. Regarding coal at Platte River, the coal plant is the single largest source of capacity that they have. It's used for base load energy needs. It provides approximately half of Platte River's annual energy. Reliable fuel from the Powder River Basin. It's close proximity to the plant. And here's what's really important about it, though. The electricity, quote, electricity can be piled up next to the generator, ensuring a reliable supply no matter what happens. So it's intrinsic energy security that you don't get with any other power source, maybe other than nuclear. The financials of it, Platte River is the coal plant is the lowest operating cost generating resource of the entity. There's long-term rail and fuel contracts. The fuel cost is mitigated through flexibility of existing contracts, and it just speaks directly to the mission statement, right? Financially sustainable energy. With all that in mind, or with all that said, it's going to be removed from the energy mix at the end of the decade, which is really unfortunate. And there was a report that was I saw recently, which actually showed keeping it was the more environmentally friendly thing to do because of the having to build stuff and infrastructure and such, that keeping the coal plant actually will emit less CO2 than getting rid of it. So I'm going to hit on some other things. Contrast that with wind and solar from the Platte River website. It's intermittent. They call it a renewable source of energy, but that's a misnomer. These things are just energy machines. They break down, they need maintenance. They say zero air emissions. Well, that's true in the moment, but it's really only true if you ignore what it took to get there and the mining and refining that goes on behind the scenes. So anyhow, this pursuit of electrification, this is aspirational policymaking at its worst. It's going to create energy uncertainty, especially against the backdrop of Platte River's plans to remove the most reliable generation tool in the portfolio. And it's turning us into the worst kind of environmentalist. It's making others suffer our negative externalities. And all you have to do is drive along I-70 and see the sea of wind turbines. But really, do it at night, and it's just a sea of these red blinking lights. And so we're just offloading our problems onto other people. There's no such thing as a free lunch. There's always trade-offs. Jevons paradox, I'd like to mention that real quick because people talk about efficiency as a way to save energy, but it doesn't work that way. If you just look it up, it's an economic truth that's out there. I guess my 5 minutes are up. I had a few more things to say, but I'm just going to have to leave it at that. But well, I'll just say even the administration is going in on an all above energy approach. So the truth is out there if we only open our eyes to see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Vic Pizzo.
Okay, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, let me turn this on too. Yeah, I wanted to talk about there are major threats to the if you want to go all electric, you are setting yourself up. You're a sitting duck for disaster in the future. You have to have some diversity in your power sources. The reason, let me go through some examples here. The biggest danger to one of the biggest dangers to Earth are coronal mass ejections. You probably heard about these at times in the news. There are storms that come from the sun that hit the Earth's magnetosphere, cause all kinds of damage on Earth because they drive currents throughout the system all the way down to the surface. that there was one of the biggest events was in 1859 when the only thing around were telegraphs, and the telegraph, one day they looked out and the telegraph wires are all burning. That was from a solar storm. Now it's pretty rare that you get a big one like that, okay, but it's not zero chance. Secondly, there is a danger. People probably heard about the thing called the electromagnetic pulse, which is where an adversary would set off a nuclear weapon at somewhat low altitude above the Earth and blow out your power system with that. That was demonstrated literally in 1962 when the United States, right before the Test Ban Treaty, set off something called the Starfish explosion. And it was like 1,000 miles away from Hawaii, but it blew out the lights and a lot of electrical systems in Hawaii. And think about 1962, how many vulnerable power systems did you have? We were actually very low vulnerability at those times. Now we're horribly vulnerable with all this electrical interconnectivity connectivity that we have. But a bigger threat even is you can this is something you could put in a pickup truck. Basically, you can have a non-nuclear electromagnetic pulse generated by a small device that's easy, that is designs on the website. On the web, you can find them all over the place. And don't think that all of our adversaries don't know about this. It's well known. And if you had a sort of a timed attack where you had hundreds and hundreds, or maybe thousands of pickup trucks running around and driving like right down here in Fordham Street. They pull up in front of the power station and set one of those things off. You just lost your power. And not only that, but to replace what gets destroyed in something like that, the transformers blow, and transformers are only made in a few places in the world right now. It's hard to believe, but that's what it is. And you're not going to replace them anytime soon. So, be ready for a long, long, cold winter. Finally, the electrical grid itself is very vulnerable. You don't need to actually blow out very many key points in the electrical grid, and adversaries know this. This is not, this is not something that people don't understand. So we're very vulnerable to all these things. So in summary, I want to say you have to be very careful with your plans. If you want to go like all electric, sounds great, but it's actually very deadly in principle. The resilience comes from planned, balanced, and diverse, which is non-correlated power sources. You have to have backups of various kinds that have nothing to do with each other. Remember, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and battery storage faces limits. So it's great to go mostly electric, but not purely electric. And you're actually just putting yourself at very grave risk if you go all electric. So it's not perfect, but you have to have these other backups of natural gas and coal and all these other things at least available. And like I say, if you were to lose electric system for these reasons, you're going to wait a long time before you get replacement parts. They just aren't there. Unfortunately, we've let ourselves get in that position. So that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, thank you. And Michelle, that finishes our list of those who wanted to speak.
Okay, great. And everyone was right on 5 minutes. Mary, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah. So what is our rule in terms of engaging with the folks who speak?
Yeah.
I basically just want to ask Vic what his expertise is. Is that something that's acceptable?
I think that would probably be appropriate.
Vic, what is your expertise?
I worked for with NOAA, and we worked with the group was actually we're part of the Weather Service, National Weather Service, and we provide warnings of all these kind of different phenomena I just was describing. And we work closely with FEMA and a lot of other government agencies. And so I've been working in this business. I've had like 50 years or more.
So
And
solar, so basically space weather, solar magnetic storms and such?
yes, but there's also these, you know, non-space weather things too, because people have figured out that you could attack the electric system in a lot of different ways. And for example, even if you know with storms, for example, the storms coming from the sun, you cannot turn an electric power station off, you know, with a switch. If you do that, you blow it up, basically. You have to bleed off the electric current into the ground, and you can only do that slowly. And so, and somebody has to make the decision to turn the stuff off. So if there were a big emergency like this, the question becomes, does anybody have the guts, so to speak, to actually order a big shutdown like that? Because even if you slowly do it, you're probably going to destroy a lot of little, at least parts of the grid. And so it's not a decision you take lightly.
Thank you, Vic.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay. Let's see. So next we have on our agenda, we have other business, our discussion around public invited to be heard. I was wondering, Heather, if you could give us a reminder of our current policy.
Yeah, I'll do that real quick and then I'll shoot it over to you all for discussion. So you have from the August 21st packet, and then we just had to bump that agenda item till today. That does give you kind of a synopsis of the conversation over the last couple of years. So in fall of 2022, the board started discussing options to have more interaction with community members during the public invited to be heard. We did some research on other boards, and at that time, the board decided to kind of leave it and not really make any changes, and leaving it at, you know, every person would have 3 minutes to speak. I'm just kind of summarizing this memo. They picked back up the conversation in late 2022 and early 2023, prompted by a number of emails that the board was getting from the public. And prior to that, we'd had a policy that nobody quite could track down sort of where it came from, was that we would send all of those communications from the public onto the board. But in that, during that time period, without kind of going too much into detail with that, there was some offensive materials that were sent and prompted this conversation to understand what other boards were doing, and found out that we were the only board that was doing that. And so the board at that time had a conversation about that, and also about, more broadly speaking, of who was appropriate, who they felt was appropriate to be hearing from the public, again, given your role as a board and the role of city council. And so the decision at that time was made to have only members from the public who live or work in Longmont be able to speak at public invited to be heard, knowing that there's other opportunities through the city council's public invited to be heard process for other people to speak as well. They changed the timing that people were allotted for 5 minutes, so from 3 minutes to 5 minutes, but only giving the public invited to be heard section of the agenda a maximum of 30 minutes. So if there were more than 6 public invited to be heard participants, that time frame could be shortened to keep that window within 30 minutes so that the board can still do its normal business. And then there was also a change to add in an items from board section, where there would be an opportunity from board members who could pick up any of the comments or concepts that were brought to them through public invited to be heard and bring them up for discussion. And if the board wanted to vote on putting any of those items on a future agenda for further discussion and action, they could do so at that time. So that's the synopsis of where it stands today. And then I think there's also been I missed the part where when we were discussing where the board and how the board would meet this year in order to help try to facilitate that greater engagement with the public. This was the year after, I think, more than 3 years, about 3 years, where we'd been fully virtual, to change to have the first meeting of every quarter be in person and then the following meetings being virtual, given that that really accommodated some of the schedules of the board members. And then this board, the new makeup of this board voted to revisit that discussion. So that's where we are today. I'm going to turn it over to you, Michelle, to facilitate that conversation. And me and Heather are both here to jump in and answer any questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have is there a time limit of like, if someone is invited of the public would like to join on the Zoom link? When do they have to email Heather to get the link?
So we publish in the packet, we request that they let me know by noon the day of the meeting for them to be able to do that. And that's just logistically because meetings I have in the afternoon sometimes and other things, we just, if there are any accommodations that we need to make for, if there was someone who was had a special need or something, if we needed to accommodate that, we do need some time to be able to do that. So that's why there is that piece of information in there for people to respond or to let us know prior to the meeting for that.
And then sorry, but if we have it in person and if we had someone from the public, they can just come in.
Yes, and if they needed special accommodations, they would need to give us 5 days is what the city attorney's office has requested that we put on our agendas. Just because if we needed an interpreter or something like that, working the logistics of getting some of those things in place for people to be able to participate takes a little bit of time.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Daniel?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, and so the board knows actually. I had sent an email to Heather and Lisa early about this, of making sure, and now that we've launched the new Longmont website, of making sure the actual calendar event listings for our sustainability board meetings contain clear information about how the public can engage with these meetings. And so right now that listing does not actually give any information on how the public could enter into public comment with us. And so, you know, I really would recommend, since that is the most forward promotion for this board, and I imagine where folks are getting their information, that could use a bit of a rebuild to make it more welcoming to the public and clear to the public about how they can engage. And so, like Michelle, even to your points of like, those should be answers that I think are in that page, so that the public can really clearly understand how, when, where they can engage with the board, and especially how they can give public comment. And also noting, Lisa and Heather, for you too, that the link on that page is also broken for viewing the agenda and everything. So I think that page could use some help to wherever we land on the rules to make sure it's front and center with promoting that clearly to the public.
Yeah, with the new website, there's been a few glitches with some of the links not coming over to the new website. So we are still working on that. And I still am working with working in the process of getting that stuff taken care of to put that in there as well. And just another note, if you go on to the city's website and are able to access the city council agenda, they also have their parameters for what it requires for members of the public to speak during their city council meetings as well. So I don't think that based on what they have, our process currently is that far out of line with what they do.
Ethan?
Can we add an option where a community member can sign up once and then, or email you once and then receive a notice for every subsequent meeting? That's what the Longmont Sustainability Coalition does. I receive notices for all their meetings and only sign up once for it.
Yeah, if someone wants to ask that, I have a couple of people that I send that invitation to every month on a regular basis. I just need to know from people that that's what they would like to see.
I would love that. Do we need to make a formal motion to that regard?
No, we just need people to let me know that they would like to be
Great.
added to that. And then if they would like to speak during public invited to be heard, I would just need to know at the meetings they're planning to attend.
Great.
is Gary still here? And can we ask him if that would address his concern that he brought up?
It looks like he may have dropped off the meeting. I can email him and ask though.
Great, appreciate that.
Ralph?
I just wanted to follow up on Daniel's suggestion, which made a lot of sense to me. And Heather mentioned that it sounds like the city council has that information on the website, on their platform, and whether or not, Daniel, you want to make a motion that, or whether it's just something staff can do and we don't have to take action. But these various rules and things, what we want to do is make it easy for people without having to figure out and call some staff person and who'd have no idea who to call to find out. It should be easy. If somebody goes to the website and wants to talk to us, as soon as they come to the website, it makes sense that there any instructions that are necessary that they should know, so that whatever their situation is, they know the path forward to be able to address our committee. Just my thoughts. So Daniel, I appreciate very much that very good suggestion. And if you wanted to make a motion of some kind, or if our administrative people can tell us whether we need to do that or not, or whether we can.
We're already working with the, I'm already going to be working with our communications team to see how we can get that on our meeting portal stuff for our agenda, so we don't need to vote on that.
Thanks so much, Heather.
Thanks for pointing out the specifics of that, Daniel. I wasn't aware of those details.
You can trust me to hunt down a good user journey as a marketer.
So it sounds like we're overall happy with how public invited to be heard is set up right now, but we can just increase the communications around getting people aware of that. Ralph?
I apologize. I know it's getting late. The one thing, and I don't know how other board members feel about this, about public to be heard, is the opportunity to ask a question. By waiting until the part of our agenda is that we have the opportunity to do that, these people may be gone, especially when they've already had to sit through all of the various things that we have to do. And on the other hand, to keep this thing from going until midnight, there seems to be the need for some restrictions on that. And I was thinking about how, for instance, debates are structured, where a board member could ask a question and the person has 1 minute to respond or something like that. Other people may not feel frustrated with that, but I have felt a little frustrated that I've had a question for that person that's critical to whether or not the information that they've spent their time to present is even useful to me. And then, they're gone by the time we get to the point where we have to do that. We can, contact them and get the answer next meeting. It just doesn't seem to be an efficient way to do this. But again, I'm open to what the board consensus is on this. And I apologize at this late hour. Maybe this is something we want to table or discuss further. If somebody makes the effort to come and speak, I want it to be as useful as possible. And if there's a clarification that a board member needs, it would be nice to have a process that makes sense without it being out of control to address that. During the time we were talking about smart meters, we had 10 or 12 people at a meeting, wanting to talk. It would be difficult, but most of the time, I think it would be helpful to our process if there was a method to ask a quick question and get a quick response. Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph. I do want to jump in really quickly. Some of the caution from our attorneys when we were having this conversation early on was, I think what Mary did earlier was ask, can I ask a quick question of clarification? And I think that's the right approach. If there's something like that, I think the board generally, through public invited to be heard, we need to be conscientious of the board not being seen as speaking for city council in that engagement with the public. And that's why, again, you all are advisory to city council, and you are absolutely there to listen from the public through the public invited to be heard process. And I think that there's that flexibility for questions of clarification, but that it generally needs to be pretty narrow so that you all don't end up inadvertently sort of being out of the scope and being seen as representing city council with the public. And so that's why we put that opportunity in place, so that you all could have a discussion amongst yourselves based on the information that was brought to you through public invited to be heard, but that it wasn't a direct conversation with the board members and that individual from the public.
Lisa, I'm sorry, but so you were saying a quick clarification on a point would be within our guidelines.
Yeah, so Mary's question earlier, asking somebody about kind of their expertise or whatever, I think, and we would probably have to do that on kind of a case by case basis. So I appreciate Mary asked if that was appropriate, and Heather jumped in to say yes. So there is some space and some vetting that would happen in there, but that, is pretty narrow.
To be fair, we never did ask Vic where he lives. I know that he lives in the city, but I was interested in his expertise, and we've had circumstances in the past where we had experts on topic matter, and that we decided we didn't want to have them speaking because they didn't live in the city. And I do think that that is a sort of a central issue here.
When I was emailing back and forth with Vic, I did, as part of our policy that the board put in place, that public invited to be heard members or community members would be people who work and or live in Longmont. And I did vet that with him when I was emailing with him.
Ethan?
So the reason why I wanted to put this on the agenda in the first place was the Open Meetings Act and the fact that our virtual meetings are not open to the public in real time. If we meet in person, or if we were live streaming these meetings, or if someone could click on the Zoom link and just attend openly, then I think those changes would address that concern. But that was my main concern, and I do also agree with Mary that we should open public comment to anyone, especially if they're subject matter experts who have important input to provide on topics we're dealing with.
So to your point that you made, Ethan, on the first point of that for the Zoom link, shoot, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. Repeat what you were saying there so I can get it back if you would.
Well, I think when we were talking about this 2 months ago in our first meeting in person, there was a technological challenge where we couldn't live stream.
Yes,
These
and that
meetings
is the
because we
case.
don't
I
have-
talked with our city clerk's office about that. It takes 3 staff members to do that with excellence with city council, and our staff members, we don't have capacity to do that. And so live streaming the meetings really has focused on the ones, the meetings that, like planning and zoning, that is a quasi judicial board, and city council, if they were remote, they would be able to live stream those meetings. Neighborhood meetings, things that have bigger impact on the community as far as policy and those kinds of things are able to be live streamed. But we have 26 boards in the city of Longmont, and we do not have staff capacity to live stream all of the meetings. Several of the meetings run concurrently, so that would also be an impossibility.
So are we in compliance with open meetings when we
Yes,
run
we
meetings
are,
still?
because we post it early enough that people would be able to access it and get the information that they need to be able to attend the meeting. And again, just something to think about as you guys are thinking toward 2025. Meetings will come up with another opportunity to discuss where you meet and all of that kind of stuff. Really, the most accessible way for people to access meetings is to have them in person.
I would be fine with going back to meeting completely in person, but we didn't, is this the forum for us to discuss this? I'd almost rather we met in person and then once a quarter we had a virtual meeting for people who couldn't get there in person.
I like that.
Robert?
Yeah, so I do think meeting in person may be a challenge for me more often than for some other people. I do travel a decent bit, and it could be challenging. So I do appreciate the ability to make it to the virtual meetings. In fact, our meeting next month will be in person. I won't be able to make it. It's going to be a challenge for me. When on another topic we were talking about in terms of, you know, the accessibility to the public, I do think that one thing that I think about a lot is this isn't the shortcut. This isn't the quick path to getting information to city council and getting policy changed. And we're not the fastest route for feedback for something urgent. And we frankly don't really hear things that have very often a lot of time sensitivity to them. And there are other avenues for people to bring that to the public. So some of the challenges about coordination, I think, are navigable for people. In our role as sort of advising the city council on whether or not city staff is doing an adequate job with what they've been charged with doing, or if what city council has charged them with doing is out of step with where the public and the community thinks they ought to be. So for me, I kind of think there are a lot of avenues for the public to provide feedback. I do think that, you know, we had two speakers today, which is exciting, right? It's been a while. It's been a long time since we had that many people come to the table and want to share their thoughts with us. And I think I'm glad we've sort of closed the doors to people outside of Longmont. I think there are other avenues for their feedback to come to the table. We don't know about the expertise of people who've come in to meet and present to us. It's self-reported expertise, which can be challenging to vet, and it's only one perspective. So I really do like hearing from people, and it gives me a chance to reflect on whether or not it's something worth talking about in the future. Maybe I need to do a little bit of investigation on my own, and if I think it's something that we do need to pursue, we have that opportunity in that items from board portion of the agenda, and I think it's working as intended. So that's all.
Daniel?
Yeah, I think when it comes to accessibility of events too, maximum accessibility is, I think, a balance between both virtual and remote. You know, and so this is something this is something I know intimately from my professional career. And so, you know, in particular for a virtual meeting, that opens access to our meetings where, you know, parents don't need to find childcare, where folks that have mobility issues don't need to find transportation. And so I think the mix of virtual and in person is best for reaching our community. And to what Robert was saying is it does feel like we don't have particularly time sensitive issues. And so if we're clearly communicating how to access our meetings and work with this panel, hopefully then over the course of you know, a couple months or a couple of our meetings, someone could find an event modality that works best for them. And so I you know, I'd be a proponent of somehow keeping that virtual and remote mix going in to maximize those opportunities.
Mary?
Just a quick question. Can we just have a show of hands to see if anybody thinks we should be changing the balance of in virtual and in person at this time? Does anyone think we should be changing that balance? Okay, so we have enough people who think that we do that I'm wondering if we should make a motion to that effect and then try to sort of move on to our next issue because we still have other stuff to talk about. Is there anyone who feels strongly about this who would like to make a motion?
I would motion that we meet the next few meetings as scheduled, and then in 2025 switch to 2 out of 3 meetings in person.
2 out of 3, 2 out of 4.
2 out of 3 in person.
Well, that's a little. Okay, so 1 meeting.
So just a second before we make a motion on this, our agenda item is actually regarding public invited to be heard and not the meeting venue for next year. So this motion is kind of out of line with procedure.
Right, but understandable how it's connected.
But
Okay.
still out of
Exactly.
procedure, so we need to follow what is on our agenda so that we are being transparent with the community.
Yeah, and I'll just add, in the first meeting in 2025, we do also, Heather, please correct me if I'm misremembering this, but we will need to discuss our meeting location and where we post the meeting agendas for the 2025 year anyway. So if you all are talking about that to take effect in 2025, we can hold that conversation until then, because that is part of our annual procedures from our.
Are you okay with that, Ethan?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm okay with it.
Do we need to make a motion to put that on for? Okay.
Oh, because it's part of our regular discussion in January at the beginning of the year. If, I think coming back to the agenda item, though, if anybody had changes that they wanted to make to the public invited to be heard, we would need a motion for that. But if you are all okay with the process that we have currently, then we don't need a motion of any kind to continue with what we have.
Okay. And we don't have anyone make a motion.
Well, I mean, I sort of feel like we have had issues in the past with people who were truly global experts on a topic that weren't allowed to speak because they don't live in Longmont, and that felt kind of silly to me, especially since some of them live in Boulder County, but not in Boulder. And I would like to have a change to that, because in city council, people who don't live in the city can speak at the last call, public invited to be heard, but we don't have an option for that at all. And it's not like we're clamoring. It's not like we have hundreds of people and coming to speak, period. And if we did have a global expert who wanted to speak on a topic, you know, and they wanted to send their resume to Heather when they got vetted so that we could look at that and know who we were talking to, I would invite that. So I don't know. Does anyone want to make a motion to this effect?
I would second that motion. I think you just made a motion.
I think you should make a motion, Ethan.
Well, in that case, I will motion that we allow subject matter experts to speak at our meetings.
Even if they don't live in Longmont?
Yes, even if they don't live in Longmont.
Can I amend to, as long as we continue to hear to the half-hour total, public invited to be heard stipulation?
And I think Ralph has a question.
Thank you. I don't know if my hand is raised or lowered at this point, but it makes perfect sense to me as a question that I had also, that if there are experts who want to speak, but I do understand the importance of having people from our community come to the advisory board for us to bring issues to our city council. And for me, that makes sense. But rather than just any expert who wants to come and talk and take our time, I certainly wouldn't want to preclude the opportunity to hear from experts. But don't we already have a mechanism where the board itself can invite an expert who's outside the area? And at least that way we can talk among ourselves. Or if an expert contacts Heather and says that I have something that I think is of importance, I think the board should decide who are the experts that we want to talk to. Then we have the opportunity to vet them. We have the opportunity to decide if it's aligned with our principles. And I'm sure Lisa will help straighten me out on this.
No, Ralph, I wanted to say something not quite to that effect, but to the effect that we will not be able to screen who's a subject matter expert and who is not. So there, like Heather and I would not have that ability or mechanism. It would either be, this is restricted to people who live or work in Longmont, or it is open to whomever wants to participate. So if, to Ralph's point, you all wanted the opportunity to vet that, so similarly to having Michael come to speak today, that's someone who is an outside expert that was connected to us through a member of the board. We brought that to this board to say, you know, hey, here's this person who's an expert in the field.
Looks like Lisa froze again.
So just to understand then, we do have a mechanism where experts that we want, I mean, I understand that the staff may not have the resources to be able to vet them, but we have the opportunity, if we're interested, to vet them ourselves and say, hey, this is someone we want to address our group. I don't want to lose the opportunity to have experts address us just because they're outside the area, but it doesn't make sense to me that any expert who wants to talk from Cleveland, Ohio, can come and take our time. That's just what my thinking is. This seems the best of both worlds. If we have the opportunity to decide for ourselves, the experts that it makes sense to have address us, and that we use our time for public to be heard, for our citizens to be able to speak with us about their issues. That's my thinking.
Yeah, and that's basically what Lisa was saying, is that we kind of are, if you have somebody that you feel is a subject matter expert that you would like to invite to the meeting, you're welcome to email her and get that set up for a future meeting, just like we did with Michael today. So limiting, you know, either for public invited to be heard, we either let everybody, including people from out of state, comment on City of Longmont stuff that doesn't affect them, or we limit it to people who live and or work in Longmont.
Do we have a motion on the floor?
I was going to say we have a motion and it's been, well, amended. So is that seconded?
So the motion that we have was Ethan moved, seconded by Mary, to allow subject matter experts to speak at public invited to be heard, even if not living and working in the City of Longmont.
Oh, Daniel.
I think we have a fundamental flaw in the, so we've been notified that that's not possible, that we can't identify a subject matter expert. Correct. So I think if this is the motion, I think it needs to be revised, that we would open public comment to anyone in the world. Is that correct? Based on what Lisa was telling us.
Yeah, it would be open to anybody and not limited to the City of Longmont.
Okay. So do we feel like we should vote on this? Okay. So all those who agree?
I mean,
All those who oppose? And I'm abstaining. Okay.
Motion fails, and I believe that means that public invited to be heard will continue with the same rules that you all have currently.
I'm happy with us being more conscientious about bringing people forward to be vetted by the community before we bring them in. I think that we probably all know people that we could bring in.
Okay, thanks everybody. So I think we can, I was just wondering about time though for our next item, because I feel like that's not going to be short, is we have discussed Platte River IRP and possible letter to City Council. So I was wondering if we want to try and have a very quick discussion about it, or if we would like to move it.
So just to recap, after last month's meeting with Platte River Power Authority, there was a motion I don't have the minutes in front of me, but that you all were wanting to discuss potentially sending a letter to city council or a recommendation to city council regarding Platte River's IRP.
So I think I'll just quickly throw out there, and I think this is to help you all kind of decide if you want to have this conversation today or bump it to the next meeting, would be one, if you all, based on the presentation from Platte River, would like to submit a letter from the board regarding the IRP. And that's kind of the first question is, do you want to do that? The second question would be, if you do want to do that, what would the content of that letter be? So if that helps you all kind of decide whether you think you can have that conversation in the next 10 minutes, we don't have anything else on the agenda. So just from you all, there isn't anything from the board, and our council liaison isn't here, and I don't have anything to share with you from council. So unless you all have other items from the board to bring up, you have the last 10 minutes to discuss this item.
I just want to say that I would like to see anyone who has been working on this issue and has been drafting questions or analysis. If anyone has anything to share with the board, I think that we should share that at this time. The folks who brought up these concerns in the first place, and then perhaps we can have something to mull over and then move the complete discussion until the next time. Since the IRP technically from Platte River technically does not have to be approved for another year, and seemed like they were really rushing to get it done. I feel like we should give it some due diligence in terms of our looking at it and examining it, and not try to rush the discussion. But I am asking if anyone's done any work, then maybe that can be put forward at this time.
Ralph?
Before we get to that, I have a procedural question about this, and that is, I think the way Lisa laid that out makes perfect sense. I think number one would be to have a quick discussion, which we could have about whether or not there are concerns. I certainly have concerns, and I think other members of this board have done extensive research that would show that we have concerns. But then I wanted to find out from a procedural standpoint, if we were able to put a motion on the table today after some people just very quickly share why they think this is something we should do. And I would certainly support that based on what I know. What the procedure would be for sharing that. For instance, there are members of the board that have put a significant amount of time into looking at some weaknesses and conflicts and problems with the IRP, but whether or not somebody maybe would just draft a letter that could be circulated between now and the next meeting so that we don't lose a whole nother month. I'm wondering if that, from a procedural standpoint, if Heather or Lisa can confirm that we could have a quick discussion in a few minutes about why people think this should be done, and whether or not then somebody wants to volunteer to draft something and circulate that. That could be over the period of the next month, giving people plenty of time to look at it and get their comments together, and then have any final questions and a vote at the next meeting so this doesn't drag on. So I wonder from a procedural standpoint whether that can be done. Can it be circulated? Can a letter, if someone wants to circulate that, be done if we vote that we want to provide a letter? Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph. I think, sorry, before I have you speak, Ethan, I was going to have Susan, since I know she's working.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer a clarification on the timeline for the IRP. It is required every 5 years. Platte River is doing it a year early because of the nature of the energy transition and our goals for 2030. It's been submitted to WAPA already at this time. So I think it's misleading to say that there's a whole year left to decide what to do. I think you need to be careful in how you think about the timing is all.
Procedurally, to answer Ralph's question, it would be like anything else that we would do if you guys wanted to circulate that. It would have to come through me to the board in blind carbon copy. So it's not something that you could have an email discussion about, simply because of the Colorado open meetings law. Once you are all on a email together, responding to one another, as soon as a third person enters that conversation, it is an open meeting, and we would be in violation of the Sunshine Law.
But Heather, somebody could circulate it so that people, if we voted today that we were interested in that, and also I would like to ask Susan, if she's still available, whether or not this is a act of futility. If this is going to have no impact, then we may want to do something else in terms of letting the community know our feelings. But if it's not going to impact things, I'm curious to know if this is a done deal. I'm very curious to know that. And then also whether or not we could circulate that letter. And I understand the sunshine laws, but at least we could be reviewing it so that if we decided, we could talk about any amendments people want to make, the questions they have, and vote on the next time. So those are my two questions. Number one, is this an act of futility because it's a done deal? And number two, could we use the procedure that I am asking about?
Go ahead, Susan.
Well, I will just tell you what has transpired to date. Whether or not you feel like a letter to City Council is an act of futility or not, I think is up to the board to decide. The Platte River Board has approved the IRP and has submitted it to WAPA. WAPA does a verification and files it. So the chances of enacting any changes in the current IRP, I think, are very limited, if any, at this point. Again, that doesn't mean that you may not want to communicate to City Council with your thoughts.
And then procedurally, it would just happen like what we did with the compost resolution that this board took to City Council earlier. And that was that, somebody could volunteer to draft a letter to City Council. We could put it on the agenda for you all to discuss any changes or whatever and go through an iteration that way procedurally if you wanted to do that. But again, through email circulation is really not the most transparent for our community members.
Ethan?
In terms of the timeline, I think that WAPA has 3 months or 90 days to approve the IRP from the time it was submitted. So I believe that would be sometime in November would be the deadline for WAPA to approve the IRP. Or I might be wrong about when was it approved by PRPA? Was that July or August? I think it was July, in which case October would be the deadline.
I'll have to look back at the approval date. I don't remember that off the top of my head either. And I do think you are correct that that there is a 3-month window for WAPA. I'll double check that as well.
I remember it being 120 days. That was recently confirmed.
Okay, so did we want to have someone volunteer to write the letter? And then, yeah, sorry, did it get sent out to us?
I'm happy to volunteer to draft a letter.
I would recommend that you all take a vote on that first question that I asked of is there a majority of you that feel like the concerns that or thoughts that you have warrant the drafting of a letter to city council and ask that question first. And then ask the question of having someone, if that the answer to that is yes, to volunteer to draft something and circulate thoughts from others.
So if we want to talk about what our concerns are, in terms of drafting a letter, I mean, we can outline those concerns right now, but we're 1 minute in. I have very big concerns. I have very big concerns about the IRP. I don't think that we have enough time to talk about this here.
Ralph? Oh, you're muted.
At the risk of not having us had enough time to really discuss it in depth, and since we aren't doing anything other than taking advantage of Ethan's gracious offer to draft something, I know from my discussions with Ethan that he's extremely knowledgeable about this topic. I would like to make a motion that the board, you guys can help me with wording here, but just see, the bottom line is that the board consider sending a letter that would be drafted and discussed at the next meeting for any comments, and that if at that time the board approves it, that we send it to city council. So my motion is that we move forward with a letter that addresses concerns about the IRP for board consideration at the next meeting.
Before we vote on that, Daniel, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to follow up with what Lisa offered us, and I think we have to consider our roles and advisors. And so if we are sending a letter of concerns about the IRP, you know, we have to address, I want to make sure we're doing that in the good faith of following the North Star of, you know, the experts we met with last month, while also, you know, reflecting on how we can be most effective in our advisory capacity to city council. And so my concern with a letter, of concern is how it may be interpreted and how it may be felt this late in the game of the process and this late in the game of being able to change anything with the IRP. You know, the suggestion that our city council would run counter to the other city councils in this process and bring it to a halt to redo, you know, to reopen the report. You know, that's a big ask, and that's a big suggestion in a letter of concern to come from the Sustainability Advisory Board. And I say that specifically, you know, I think there's great merit to Ethan owning this expertise to share with city council as a new member, to say I wasn't here. But here's the first chance I got to comment on this IRP, here's some thoughts. But I think the general question here is why, you know, if the Sustainability Advisory Board has so many concerns about this IRP, I think the fundamental question is why we waited 5 years and after the deadline to express them. And so that interpretation, for whatever reason, I think, you know, challenges our trustworthiness and judgment as advisors to city council. And so I want to take that into account as we consider, you know, publicly publishing and signing letters of concern about, you know, the Platte River utility.
I'm not sure we have a second for my motion even to be engaging in the discussion, Michelle. I don't know if you want to call for a second and then, following appropriate, you know, procedures, then open the floor to discussion and then take a vote.
I was also wondering if we wanted, as
I
Lisa
think we need
was
to move this whole
suggesting,
question to next time. I really do.
So there's still a motion on the table. We either need a second or we need the motion to be withdrawn in order for us to do that.
I seconded.
And then a vote, Michelle.
Terry, can we read the motion one more time?
Ralph Grosswald moved that the board move forward with letter to city council that would be drafted, addressing the board's concerns about the Platte River's IRP.
And I just want to mention again that we are not agreeing that we're sending it. All that we're agreeing to at this point is that we would look at a draft that would be prepared. We would, we would have any questions and comments we want to add to it, and then make the decision whether or not we think this is worth having these points made.
Okay.
Basically, what we're basically doing is making the same motion as we did last month, but we're moving it to next month because we didn't have time to talk about it.
Well, hopefully next month we'll have a draft of a letter that we will.
I think this motion is different from last month because last month it was to table it to this month. This motion that Ralph made is for a drafted letter
Right.
for the board to look at next month. So a draft would need to come to the board prior to the meeting for you all to be able to publish it in the packet and then discuss it and vote on it.
Okay.
Okay. And it was seconded. So do we have a all those in favor? And all those who oppose? And then no abstaining. Okay, but it was 4-3.
Yeah, so that motion does carry.
Yes, Ralph?
Could I just ask Ethan if he would volunteer to provide such a letter to the board?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so before the next meeting, we'll have that to review. Okay. Well, I think we can finally wrap this up then. Great discussions today. Oh, we need a motion to end the meeting.
I move to end the meeting.
Right?
Second. Do we need a second on that? Second.
And all those in favor? Okay, great.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you,
Good night.
guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Person
Y'all later.
next time.